Happy holidays from the Signal Watch. This year, we're watching movies that are Christmas films, but which fall into at least one other genre. We're looking for films that mix up a bit of the spirit of the season with horror, sci-fi, or whatever our co-contributors brought to the table. So, get out the eggnog and join us for some holiday fun as we talk a few Christmas movies. Stay merry. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, happy holidays and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Amy Cavender.
Welcome back, Amy. It's been a very long time.
Hasn't it? It feels like forever. And it might have been because time has no meaning.
That's right. I think it was last January we did your holiday install that for that. And so now we're back with another holiday movie, and you selected
Shazam.
Shazam from 2019. So
Yes.
what made you decide to pick Shazam?
Well, you and I both enjoy comic books, and I thought a comic book movie that had some holiday elements might be something we would both enjoy.
And I did. I'd seen this once before. I think I actually enjoyed it more on the second viewing. And I will tell you why. I, like most comic fans, have opinions about characters, and we have favorite versions of characters. Shazam is a character who is almost as old as Superman. He had first appeared in like 1939 in Whiz Comics #2 as Captain Marvel. And I know we talked in the Captain Marvel, Jamie and I talked about Captain Marvel. I almost said Laura Danvers. It's not Laura Danvers. It's not Kara Danvers. I'm getting all of my Supergirl names.
Carol Danvers.
Carol Danvers. So I there's a it was a very kid-oriented character. And I'd first come across him back in the 70s, not with the live-action TV show, which I wasn't even aware of until like after college. There was a cartoon that ran for like a season or something like that on maybe CBS. And that's where I knew Shazam. They called him Shazam at that point, where I knew him from. And then in the comics, he appeared as Captain Marvel. DC was still using that name in the comics. And Jerry Ordway was doing a lot of Shazam, Captain Marvel comics in the like late 80s, early 90s. It's a blur for me because it's like right around 1990, I want to say. I read that run in trades. They were actually collecting that in trades, and really enjoyed it. And so I kind of have this idea in my head of Billy Batson is about 9 in my head, and Captain Marvel is very much a square-jawed, and there's different depictions they do of sometimes he's a completely different guy than Billy. And in some versions, he's just Billy posing, he looks like an adult for various reasons. And this was a little different from all that. And I think they went deep on what would it, kind of the big thing of what would it be if you were, 14 and suddenly looked like you were 32. And I had to adjust to a bit of that. I will say, like, also the costume looked a little different from what I expected. Like, I'm very much into the kind of classic blousey sort of look. Um, and, I even go for like the frill on the cape and all that stuff. But I'm past all that because I've seen it, and it just, it's in my head now. And none of those things bothered me on this viewing. I could just enjoy it for what they did and kind of what it was. And so I didn't have that cognitive dissonance going in this time. So how about yourself? Are you a Captain Marvel fan, a Shazam fan?
I hadn't had a lot of exposure to the character except for like just kind of glancing little moments here and there. Probably the most content that I had ever read that had any variation of this character in it would be Kingdom Come.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where a lot of my mental picture comes from, is from that story, which is, kind of stands alone in a lot of ways. So
Right.
It's not a character that I had a lot of feelings about or had a lot of expectations about. My perception was kind of like, this is the magical Superman, as opposed to Superman, who's an alien. So this is just magic Superman.
Yeah, I mean, and not to get too much into the comics, but he was at one point outselling Superman back in like the 40s, and eventually DC, the company that became DC National Comics, sued the hell out of Fawcett. And you have to keep in mind kind of the perspective of the average juror, in this era, when they're like, can you tell the difference between this guy who's super strong in a cape and this guy who's super strong in a cape? And there are vast differences, between who the two different characters are, between being a little boy who magically transforms, and in the comics he had a best friend who was an anthropomorphic talking tiger, and all this other stuff. And but that wasn't what the jury decided, and basically sued him into oblivion. In the 70s, DC ended up buying the rights, and originally DC tried to reintroduce him as like Captain Thunder. And because at this point, Marvel had already introduced their version of Captain Marvel, I want to say. And so anyway, but eventually they introduced, kind of classic Captain Marvel with the title of Shazam, and it kind of came through, various iterations. This version in the movie is really tied to very late breaking kind of versions of Shazam. Like the first hint of this flavor popped up in, good golly, what was the Flash storyline? Starts with a P. I can't remember it right now, but it was basically what
It's
ended
not Flashpoint.
Flashpoint.
Oh, okay.
It was Flashpoint. Yeah,
so it has
sorry.
a P in it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I probably was trying to say PowerPoint. And there was kind of the idea of him, like, he'd always shared his powers with like Freddie and Mary, and Freddie was his friend and Mary was his sister. And then they got into the idea of like him being kind of hanging out with this ragtag group of kids. And my understanding is, as of the New 52, this is really the flavor it is. But I've never read any of that. I just never, honestly, got budgeted out from ever trying the current version of Shazam. I read too many other things. So I've never really read it. But it was interesting to see it kind of, when the movie came out. I had it deeply spoiled for me because I happened to walk down the aisle at Target and see the toys that came out. And I was like, okay, I guess all that's going to happen in the movie. Anyway, that was my perspective coming in, was, between the comics and the toys and all the rest of it, and so when I came in on kind of the second round, it was I was kind of unburdened by that and just enjoyed it a lot more. What
Well,
did you think? Because this is your first viewing, right?
it was, and it was, it was a really, the reason I chose this was because I basically Googled Christmas superhero movie just to see what popped up, and this was one of the options, and I was not sure what to expect. I really was very, very naive about the character, and I didn't read a lot about it. I was like, okay, it's either this or Batman Returns. Those are the two options. And so I knew that it was a DC movie. I knew it was a DC character, limited exposure through a not really canonical comic. So I was just prepared to see what was there. And when I had mentioned that I was doing this, I noticed I posted about it on Facebook in a couple of discussion groups, like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And the reactions that I got were very polarized, which I thought was interesting. There were some people who were like, it just didn't suit me. They weren't like mad about it or anything, which is refreshing for reactions to comic book movies, frankly. And then other people were like, it was so wholesome. I really enjoyed that. I found it very enjoyable. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll see. And so when I actually watched it, I'm definitely on team wholesome for this one. It was sweet. And it wasn't like treacly. It wasn't too sweet because once Billy is given the Shazam power and can look like an adult, he does all this like really irresponsible, terrible stuff of like buying beer and, all this kind of silly things. Like that a teenager would think was really cool if they could suddenly be an adult. So he wasn't this perfect little Boy Scout, and he certainly didn't have a perfect little life, but he was making it work. And when it came time to do the right things, he eventually got around to doing the right things. So
yeah, and I think that's
enjoyable.
really I think he has kind of a two-pronged story arc, which is, accepting this foster family as his family is kind of the painfully obvious one if you're like a grown-ass adult watching this film. Well, I know where this is headed because he's rejecting them at first, but these kids are all adorable. And it's not a criticism. It's just we're adults watching a movie intended for a younger audience.
Yes.
And then the other one is kind of like great power, great responsibility. How is he going to learn how to actually use this in a meaningful way? And I think both storylines, the second one is a lot more complex of how he kind of comes to that. Of course, there's like a threat to his family, and it is definitely tied in with him embracing the foster family as his family. But there's no real, argument for him to do anything but stand around doing selfies and whatnot. Crime is not easy to find. One doesn't really just fly around a city and spot crime all that often.
Especially when you haven't figured out how to fly yet.
Right. So like the scene of him standing kind of on the steps of the I don't know what that building actually is in Philadelphia. That's in all the movies. But standing on the steps there, and you're, kind of being challenged by Freddy. And so there's this, really, I think, good dynamic that they managed to build between these very talented kid actors that appear in the movie.
Yes, those kids were darling, and they were all darling in different ways, which was great. I'd also like to point out that I thoroughly enjoyed the fact that it was in Philadelphia, given all the things that are going on right now. So I propose that we call that area Gritty Plaza and just roll.
Every Rocky fan's like, no!
Oh, there's room for more than one hero in Philadelphia. I feel very confident. Not just the Fanatic, and not just Gritty, even Rocky. There's a lot. I know some history happened there too, but whatever. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the fact that it was in Philadelphia. That actually added to my experience, not only because it's like, I know Gotham and Metropolis feel real at this point for a lot of us who've spent a lot of our imaginary time there, but it's just nice to see a real place.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those funny things is like if you were to ask me, I never read that much Golden Age Captain Marvel. In the 90s, I want to say because the company that they had purchased had been Fawcett Comics, they kind of established him living in Fawcett City, but that's not going to mean anything to a mass audience. So it was cool to see kind of the grounded city of Philadelphia as part of that for sure. Because it has Philly, even though we're in Texas, still has its reputation. So knowing he's like a Philly kid was kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That added a little something to me. It felt very timely, especially we're recording this now. I don't know when it's going to come out, but Philadelphia has been on a lot of people's minds lately, and that just was kind of a nice touch.
Yeah. So as far as like, do you feel you succeeded with your charge to find a Christmas film with this film?
So that's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure. I was relying on the internet, and occasionally the internet doesn't steer you exactly where you were expecting to go. We've all done this. I think that the aspects of it that feel Christmassy, there we go, to me are kind of the wish fulfillment aspect and the focus on family. That I think this would be a great movie to watch with a family, especially a blended family or a family that has foster kids, or if you have neighbors who are fostering or adopting. I think this would be it would fill a purpose that is often sought for films at Christmas time. I kind of wish that there was a little bit more of the Santa character, or I'm not sure if it was the same Santa that kept on getting terrorized or not, but I think that would have been a kind of a fun through point if they had done a little bit more with that. But there was plenty of Christmas stuff in the background, and it was definitely a holiday story in the timing that it happened with, but it's not like, Shazam rode Rudolph off to the rescue or something like that before he figured out how to fly, which I would definitely pay good money to see.
I think it because of all the reasons you just said, I won't repeat them. I think it does kind of land as a Christmas movie. It's sure you could have done a lot of this story without it, the Christmas setting, but I think for all the reasons you said, it does qualify.
It's a good family movie without it being like entirely dull for the adults.
Yeah. Now, I will say one of my things with this movie that, and everyone's kids are different and everyone's got a different tolerance for these things, but I was a little surprised at, and I'll make this as my challenge to like the wholesomeness bit. They changed Savannah a lot from the comics, or at least the comics I've read for the movie. This is probably in the comics as the modern take on Savannah, but he was always in the comics this kind of, think of like shrimpy Lex Luthor. Like he was always this kind of goofy looking guy in a lab coat who was kind of undersized and kind of trying to steal Shazam's power using super science and stuff. And making him, I mean, in recent comics, I think you could see him like killing people or whatever, because that's just modern comics. But the scene where he walks in to the boardroom and like murders everybody in there using the 7 sin demons, is a horror show.
That's a valid point, and I guess that I'm so inured to violence at this point. I was just like, this is such sweet hearts and flowers. I mean, yes, some people did get disemboweled, but hey, a couple of defenestrations. you know.
And it doesn't entirely move the story forward. That whole movie could exist without that sequence ever happening, because I had forgotten John Glover plays Dr. Savannah's father, and Dr. Savannah's played by Mark Strong, I think, to good effect. But he walks into the boardroom of this company, and then he doesn't do anything. It's not like he's taking over the company. He's just getting revenge. There's an opening sequence where you see him kind of getting verbally abused by his father and brother. And you get the idea this is not a one-off instance, right? And his father gets thrown from the car. And I had, in my memory, was John Glover got killed in that sequence. I forgot he actually popped up again. But there's nothing that really comes out of that sequence. And I think it's still in the movie just to show how bad he's become, and to kind of set it up for when you have the sin demons fighting the Marvel family later, to just basically set up like they're an actual threat. But it feels like it's something left over from another draft of the script to me.
I take your point on that. I do. And the other thing was kind of interesting to me about the Seven Deadly Sins characters is how completely divorced they were from any meaningful parallel with what they were supposed to embody.
Yes. It was weird.
They felt like just kind of generic, scary monsters, not embodiments of human failings.
Right.
They didn't even look all that human. They didn't look human at all. So I don't know. It's strange.
Yeah, I mean, in the comics, I don't remember if they're actually physically trapped there or there's just statues of them there. No, they're really physically trapped there. But as statues, and that, the wizard also doesn't die in the comics. He's always there. He's always hanging out the Rock of Eternity to kind of, yell at Shazam for this, that, or the other. But I thought that was a little strange. Like, it seems like there could have been something they could have done with that, but there just wasn't enough movie time for it, I guess.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm wondering about, and I'm assuming this is the setup for the next movie, and people that are more well-versed with the character will be able to explain why, but it was narratively unsatisfying that there weren't enough new Shazam family folks to take all the thrones.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something that they'd fill out with the parents, or I don't know. I do know, it was 6, right?
I think there are 6 kids and 7 thrones.
So my guess is I don't know if you noticed, one of the producers on this is Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who has been announced to play Black Adam in a coming movie. So Black Adam, if you don't know, is a counterpoint to Shazam, who was like an Egyptian era. Sorry, Egypt still exists. That sounds weird. He was kind of back in the pyramid days of Egypt, running around as kind of doing what Shazam was supposed to be doing. I don't want to get too much into it because there's some versions where that's what he is. He's actually that old. And there's some versions where he's like an archaeologist who got the, Shazam's the upside. He's the downside, of the power. So I don't know exactly what they're going to end up doing. But my guess is that's the 7th chair. And one of the things that Jeff Johns did in the comics over the years was try and find kind of like Shazam and he aren't exactly at each other's throats. They're just kind of like cousins who kind of just side-eye each other at family gatherings, sort of thing.
Oh, I've got one of those. I know how that is.
So maybe that's the plan, is to bring in Dwayne Johnson for that 7th chair. So
interesting.
I don't know. But yeah, it has also a I don't know how kids would take it. I assume pretty well, because I never heard any criticism of it. But the whole setup is of course he's this orphan who's running around looking for his mother, and he does find her in the course of the film, and she's just like, yeah, I was 17 and I didn't know what I was doing, so when I saw the cops with you when I lost you at the county fair, I just decided you were better off with them. And I was like, holy cow, man, that is some heavy stuff for a kid. It's like honestly easier to deal with how it was in the comics, where his parents went off to Egypt and like got killed over there and never came back. Then, I mean, because that's all very fictional and abstracted for a kid. But like hearing your mom go, yeah, I wasn't making ends meet, and I decided just to give you up. That was to me like way darker even than like the murder sequence that happened at the with Savannah's dad and brother.
Yeah, I could see that. Although I also think that, I mean, for some people that's kind of how it shakes out. You know, for some families you end up not getting accepted for whatever reason by your family that you were born into, and then you end up in a family that chooses you.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And it was just in a otherwise kind of cheery kids movie, but at the same time, I think it worked really well narratively to drive him. You know, he'd been having these people who were saying, "We do love you, we do want you around," including all of the siblings. I mean, maybe Pedro wasn't saying it, but you knew he meant it.
Yeah, yeah.
I love the Pedro character, by the way, but but yeah, it was just like, I just couldn't believe how heavy it was when I was watching it. But
yeah, and I think that's one of the things that this movie did really, really well. I think it was a good balancing act in my perception, because it did have several heavy moments and some dark moments, but the impression that you're left with is not heavy and dark. And that's extraordinary for the DCU.
Oh yeah,
or the DCEU, I guess is what they're calling it in the movies. It is extraordinary in that way. The only one that I've seen so far that has left me remotely as cheery was probably Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I mean, even Aquaman, I think, tried for that, and I had so many quibbles with Aquaman that it didn't land as well with me by the end. Like this has such a great sort of upbeat ending of, you know, he's going to be staying in the home, and then of course he shows up as Shazam for lunch with his brother. So, kind of the redemption bit there at the end. It was good plant and payoff.
Definitely. It just but in the meantime, there was also some horrible intergenerational abuse, and then there was this abandonment thing from this parent that had been sought for so long, and straight up just monster murder, and all those things were in this movie too. But the takeaway was brightness and lightness, which was really, really shocking for a DC movie.
Yeah. Yeah,
that alone is quite an achievement.
I mean, you have, of course, you have the cute little girl who plays Darla, who's just like a little beam of sunshine every time she shows up in a scene. And you have Mary traditionally has kind of filled that role in the comics of she's just always perky and looking on the bright side, making Supergirl look edgy. And they gave Mary's whole thing. She has a very real dilemma that they introduce, which doesn't get resolved by the end of the film. Of she's actually been accepted to a great college, and might have to leave the happy family. But yeah, I mean they but I guess where I was going with this is the two boys in the film. One actually felt very much like real teenage boys walking and talking. including like the sense of humor, especially that Freddie had in the film. Like that just felt so absolutely genuine. And that kid was a masterful little actor at 15 or whatever he was.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see it coming, by the way, when everyone got transformed into a Shazam at the end?
I had hoped for such a thing. There have been a couple of stories that I've enjoyed over, I guess, my adulthood, where the big payoff is that power is distributed.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of a chosen one, there's a chosen bunch, or there's a whole lot with, probably the first really notable example of that happening being, hope this isn't a spoiler for anybody, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Where, all this time the Slayer had been laboring under this, like, there can be only one at a time, kind of like a Highlander, but different. And then she was like, nope, we're all Slayers now, globally. And that was really cool. And so that was pleasing to me that it was spread out like that. And I think I had something rattling around in the back of my head was that there was a Marvel family. And
okay.
I think I had picked that up through, like, leafing through a DC Comics character encyclopedia or something at some point. So it wasn't completely out of left field, but it's happened in a couple of other stories I've enjoyed over the past few years. So I'm often hoping for that kind of thing because I'm kind of tired of chosen one stories.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't put it in that way. I hadn't looked at it through that lens. I'd had it spoiled for me. That was what I had spoiled for me on the toy aisle.
Got it.
It was like walking down the toy aisle and here's all these multiple colored suits on all these different characters. And I was like, oh, and kind of was vaguely aware they were doing something like that in the comics. So I knew going in, and I was a little mad that it had been spoiled because it's such a good moment in the film. And it happens so late, frankly, that, you usually expect that maybe that would happen at like the 2/3, marker or whatever, heading into the third act. But it ends up in kind of like, there's also like a 5-act structure sort of idea. I think it happens maybe in the middle of the fourth or something like that. But I thought it was a great payoff for what they'd been kind of building to, of if we all pull together as a family, and we, look on the bright side, we can do this. And I think it, as you said, it's why it makes a great Christmas movie.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Besides the decapitations, which I actually forgot about. If you could figure out the timestamp on that before watching with your kids, you could probably accidentally boot past it and it wouldn't matter narratively at all. So.
Like literally would not matter. They'd never know the difference. So
that's true. So quick, someone make an unauthorized cut.
But yeah, I don't know. I took a look at the IMDb page before we started recording, and I will be curious to see what ends up happening. They're not supposed to release, and everything's gotten pushed back by a year and a half because of COVID. But right now, the sequel is listed for 2023. Black Adam, I think, is supposed to be coming out in 2022. But that's a really long time between 2019 and 2023. Like the kids who were in this are going to be, adults at this point. So I'm assuming it's going to have to get recast, and they're going to have to do some thinking on that, or else they're going to be doing Shazam Goes to College.
Well, or they could just make everybody wear COVID masks and shoot it, as if it were in 2020.
One factoid, one trivia bit that I thought was interesting, when they all do transform into the Shazams, the guy who plays Pedro, I believe, was originally cast in 2006. George Miller, the guy who did Mad Max, was supposed to get a Justice League movie, and he had cast everybody super, super young. And that guy, DJ Cortona, I think is how you pronounce it, was supposed to play Superman in that movie. So apparently if you wait around long enough, you get a DC movie of some sort. So
All
Everybody,
right then.
everybody hold out. You might still get that movie. Yeah, I thought that was really strange. That they, when they were doing that Justice League movie, and they were basically making it like Justice League Kids, because the cast at that point was all like in their early 20s. And my assumption being they're planning on like a lengthy franchise out of that. But yeah, it anyway. He did wind up in the tights. So
Good for him.
yeah.
I'm glad something worked out at least a little bit.
You have any other
Cool.
Shazam thoughts?
No, I'm glad we watched it. I'm deeply glad to find content that is new and that doesn't make me sad. And this was definitely on balance. This was a happy watching experience. So I'm glad that we watched this.
Yeah, I was glad to kind of, because I probably fell in the camp of, it was fine, but not my cup of tea when I watched it the first time. And I like I said, I think I enjoyed it more on the second go around, kind of for seeing it for what it is, seeing the kids kind of, or at least how they portrayed Shazam as being a kid, and all the different very believable things of, let's set up a YouTube channel, let's have you test your powers, and kind of doing everything but actually what the superheroes usually leap right into in one of these movies. It was made on a really low budget. I want to say it was less than $100 million, which seems like a lot of money to you or I. But the DC movies are, I bet the new Wonder Woman was a $250 million movie. And always filmed on these kind of epic scale, but this one, it's kind of friendly neighborhood Shazam. Like, they shot on real streets with Zachary Levi kind of standing around in his costume, and there's plenty of special effects that all work perfectly fine, but it's not the if you think of the ending of Aquaman, where it's like there's approximately like 10,000 characters on screen currently. They're all underwater, and there's lasers and giant crab beasts and submarines and everything else that they throw at the movie, including Nicole Kidman. And this just isn't that movie. This is a very different, smaller scale thing.
Yeah, it is, and I think that that's part of the charm, frankly, is that it just seemed accessible, and there were moments in it that reminded me a little bit of Chronicle. Have you ever seen that?
No, I never did.
Ryan, fix your life. We're going to watch that next.
Only if we then go into 30 minutes about Max Landis.
Okay. Retract it. But seriously, it had some feel of that, just because of the discovery process and the let me get my cell phone out kind of bit, which was felt very real. So
yeah, I mean, it when Spider-Man came out in 2002, you're kind of used to it from like seeing Spider-Man do it. For some reason, we don't seem to do that with like the adult heroes. Like, Wonder Woman just knows what she's up to. You don't see Batman like figuring out how to throw a batarang. He just does. I think Superman's "what can I do with these powers" sequence is about 30 seconds before he's flying into space and zipping all over the place, and something as recent as Man of Steel. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to kind of bring it back, and that was always kind of, to me, the point of Shazam as a kid was, what if I could go sit at the table, with the Justice League or whatever? What if me and my friends could all suddenly become superheroes, as you imagine you would as a kid? Because you don't imagine yourself as a kid superhero. You're always like, I know I'd be an adult. And seeing kind of how all of that actually plays out, which is of course colored far differently at being age 14 than being age 9, as Billy Batson usually is in the comics. But anywho, thanks a lot for bringing this. I really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. I enjoyed it too, and it's always a pleasure to get to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. All right, everyone.
All
Well,
right.
we will be back soon. I think next up, I don't know what's next up. I'll be real honest. I have a spreadsheet somewhere so I don't have to remember these things. But we'll be back soon, and hopefully we can get Amy back earlier than once a year. We'll get her back in 2021.
Hooray.
All right. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Ryan.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.